I'm Bob Bolton from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and this is Alaska Voices, a place for communities to connect through conversation in order to build a better tomorrow for Alaskans and the world.
Originally, I grew up in Gakona, Alaska,
Tyonek,
Egypt,
Idaho,
Rampart,
St. Lawrence Island,
St. Paul.
and I'm here with my student,
my science buddy,
my teacher,
my homie.
I'm his daughter.
My name is Eran Hood. I'm 49 years old, and I'm talking with Gabe Wolken, who is a collaborator of mine on a number of different research projects.
My name is Gabriel Wolken. I'm age 45, and I'm speaking with Eran Hood, who is a collaborator of mine.
It was actually a sunny, beautiful day in July in 2011, and someone called me up and said, "We're having a flood out at the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center, and we're not sure why." So there was a couple of us that had a suspicion, and we jumped in a helicopter, and we started flying up the Mendenhall Glacier. A few kilometers up the glacier, you get to the Suicide Basin, which is the main glaciers acting as a dam and holding water into that basin. It was very clear just from looking at it that the water had drained out of that basin, and there was icebergs stranded everywhere, and the ice was all cracked and deflated. And so we landed, and actually when we landed, the basin was just finishing draining, and so the glacier ice where we landed was actually still settling and cracking. It was very disconcerting. And so we said, well, I think we found where this flood is coming from. We solved the problem, and it appears to be drained, so we don't have to worry, because down at the visitor center, they were looking and just saying, well, does anyone know when it's going to stop going up? It had just started to flood onto some roads, get into people's yards and things like that. So they're really starting to worry, and that's about when it turned around.
Yeah, that's an interesting project that we're both involved in. It's so near the community of Juneau, and it involves several hundred to perhaps thousands of people if you think about the critical infrastructure that's in the way of the Mendenhall River and the outbursts that are generated from Suicide Basin. Glacier Lake outburst floods are rapid releases of water from a lake that's formed either underneath, inside, or on top of a glacier, or in some cases impounded by a moraine, which is caused by a glacier. And then that rapid release is when the ice dam fails or when the moraine fails, and in rare situations when something falls into the lake and a displacement wave causes the dam to be overtopped. So in the case of Suicide Basin, a tributary of the Mendenhall Glacier has receded, but the over-deepened cirque into which that tributary used to exist fills up with water, and that ice that's for the most part stagnant tends to raise and lower according to how much water is in there. And then every once in a while it outbursts catastrophically because the dam has broken or the plumbing underneath the glacier has become efficient and tremendous amounts of water are released at once.
So since that point, we've been studying it, and people in town are really interested because it's something that they see right in their backyard, that they experience. They're very complicated events because year to year, it's so unpredictable. We'll have a huge flood one year, then the next year we'll have 2 medium-sized floods, then the next year we'll have a huge flood, and the next year we'll have 5 really small floods. And so it's that same thing where we get from the people at the city, like, oh my gosh, this is a problem, we need to study this. And then goes away for a couple of years and sort of out of sight, out of mind, like we're not worried anymore, and then it comes back again. And so that's been one of the challenges, is just trying to keep consistent interest in it.
That is such a problem, is trying to keep people's interest when these things don't behave predictably.
When I talk to people about what I do and what I'm studying with glaciers, the assumption is that there's always some sort of trend, like glaciers are going like this and it's a trend, or the amount of water coming out of glaciers is increasing and that's a trend. But really we bounce back and forth in coastal Alaska between these different states in terms of, snow and rain and that sort of thing. And, I try to tell people, well, we're certainly going to bounce back and forth a lot, But in the future, we're moving more towards the kind of things that we're seeing now, and how long it's going to take to get there, where potentially the ski area might not be viable at some point anymore. We don't really know.
I think the best opportunity to inform people about these types of events is probably in a place like Juneau, because it does affect so many people, and it is, really apparent, especially from the visitor center, one of the most widely visited glaciers in Alaska. And in another location where this happens is in Valdez, but it's a different phenomena where this is a ice-dammed lake. In this case, we can see it. We can see when it fills, we can see when it empties, and we can have a better idea about how much water is actually in there and how much is releasing, and trying to understand the timing of the magnitude and frequency of the events. Part of the city of Valdez is on one side of the Valdez Glacier stream, and part of it's on the other side. And so if there are residents who need services from the city, such as an ambulance, and if the outburst flood is large enough and it stops people from being able to access some of those services, they're really concerned about that, as they ought to be. And in a place like Valdez, the residents are very anxious anytime there's an outburst event. And I get phone calls every time the water level starts to rise. And when we installed our cameras to make them available to the public, as soon as one camera goes down, immediately I get emails and phone calls, because people like to wake up in the morning, make their coffee, and then check to see what the lake level is in the summertime.
Yeah, that's funny. That reminds me of a time in Juneau. So when the flood started, what we did the following year, we went up and we put a pressure transducer, which is basically just a sensor that measures the depth of water above that. And so we went and we installed that kind of along the edge of the ice in the lake that was building up underneath, and put a transmitter on it so that would allow us to watch in real time as the lake was filling up. And 2 years after the original flood, the lake level was again getting very high, and so people were watching on the sensor, and we had gone and installed it, and then all of a sudden it broke. And everyone's calling, like, what's going on with the sensor? We can't see what's going on with the lake. So we went up there, and we had put, something like a sensor that had a range up to 150 or 200 feet, and the water level had gotten so high it exceeded that. And the funny thing was that where we kind of had our little base of operations on this cliff, there was a big bench there. Well, the place where we usually work was already underwater. We never expect the water to get that high. So we get up to the station, and we put in a new pressure transducer that's, can take over because the other one's too deep. We flip the switch, it goes back on, and it's transmitting again. And at this point, people know, like, wow, there's a lot of water in the basin. And I remember going to a party, and half the people at the party had their phones, and they kept checking over and over what the basin. And sometimes the transducer would act a little funny, and they'd say, oh, it's draining, and then it would start going up again. You think it's turning over, but it's funny because in Juneau, it's almost like a party when the thing drains. People come out on the bridges, and there's families out there, and everyone's looking. And it's impressive. There's more water going down the Mendenhall River, this short little stretch into the ocean, than there is moving through the Grand Canyon.
Alaska Voices builds bridges by creating a space where community members, friends, policymakers, and scientists can share stories and place-based knowledge. This project was developed in partnership with StoryCorps and was funded by the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. Additional funding was provided by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Chancellor through a generous gift from the Bentley Family Trust. Alaska Voices would not be possible without the help and efforts of an amazing group of people. Our producer and audio engineer is Kelsey Skonberg of Mossy Stone Media. Our podcast and outreach specialist is Michael Delu, and our website designer is Carolyn Rosner. If you are interested in more conversations or information, please visit our website at alaskavoices.org.